What I'd like to put to you today is that I believe that through a collective will, by maybe just making the first commitment to speak about this issue at barbecues, that we can position the next generation of young learners to be able to solve some of the world's most critical problems just by fixing education. You see, what I think we've done in education is that we've created a situation where we have these information tornadoes sweeping across the Australian school landscape. And one of the problems with these tornadoes is they have debris. And the debris in our tornadoes in education are things like literacy programs, numeracy interventions, science kits, basketballs, everything that you can buy to bring into a school. And the good news about being in schools these days is that we're not lacking for stuff. We've got plenty of things that we can do in education. There's a great deal of choice. And that works really well in some industries. In some industries, having a plethora of choice is a fantastic luxury. But in schools, when that tornado arrives on our school's doorstep, and we have all this activity and all this whirring going on in our spaces, what's happening in the eye of that tornado is that we have a Year 3 teacher with a highly distractible 9-year-old boy trying to teach him fractions. And that's hard. What we need to do as school leaders, and what I believe I need to do as a school leader, is to make that tornado disappear, or indeed create a quieter space for that relationship to be able to flourish. What I think we need to be able to do to have these kids get to a point where they can solve the world's biggest problems is we need them to be creative, and we need them to be able to collaborate with other really smart and creative people. And to do that, I think we need to make two huge shifts. Number one is we need to free schools to be able to work on building relationships as core business. Number two is that as school leaders, we need to start thinking a lot more about how we do education than what we're going to do in schools. And I'd like to unpack for you a little bit today about how that manifested for me in my role as opening the Territory's newest school at Rosebery Primary School this year. The photo that you can see up on the screen there is Rosebery Primary School at our very first school assembly this year in January. So my challenge when I was appointed to the position last year was to how can I get to the point where these guys arrive in a school that will help them become those creative, collaborative individuals that will save the world. Not much of a task. And so I set about how, that became my mantra. I set about how can I focus on how more than what? How can I make it more about what the kids experience in the relationships at school than which basketballs I buy? And I started that by thinking, okay, what about my staff and what about my community? I've got a staff who arrived, and on the previous day of their schooling, of their work, they had worked in more than 20 different schools. And I had about 300 kids arrive, all with parents, all with expectations about how a good school would be and how a bad school might be, from more than 30 different schools. And I realised that no matter what I do, I will not satisfy them. And after a quiet moment of thinking about jumping off a bridge, I realised that what I can do, though, is make sure that what I choose is done really well, and it's done with a moral compass that is really clear to my community. And so I made a commitment to start with how, that everything I did in that school would be about how I get the job done. And my first thing to do was to work with those staff members to make sure that they understood what they needed to do. And so we took the metaphor that I would run the school like a Formula One racing car team. And what that meant is that I really believe this about working in schools, that teachers are the drivers. They're the ones that take the risks. They're the ones that put that relationship with that 9-year-old boy on the line by doing crazy stuff like trying to teach him fractions. They're the ones that crash and burn if they get it wrong, and rightly, they're the ones that should stand on the podium covered in champagne when they get it right, because what they do every day in my school is indeed a miracle. My job is to be the Formula One director. It's to get the right pit crew in place, it's to buy the best tyres, it's to get the right fuel, and it's to make sure that they get the very best advice about how you drive a Formula One race car really, really fast. Then my challenge is to get to work on what I need to do to make sure that every action and decision from then on is focused on making sure that I was meeting that how vision that I had. The first thing I did was I thought about I came up with 3 domains that I thought were really important. The first one was anecdote, and I reckon it's more important than the word story. I think the word story lately has been a bit lost. It's losing some luster. It's getting sucked into the political correctness vortex with words like mission statements and rationales and stuff like that. So what I think is important in school culture is about anecdote are the things that people say when they're at barbecues. That gets to what your school culture is all about. What kids say about their teacher, what parents say about the principal. That's what matters at barbecues. That gets to what makes your school really unique. And we thought about that space in my previous work at Ludmilla Primary School. And you can see these guys on the screen here. These guys, we took a group of 25 of them by thinking about the anecdote space, by thinking about what's the story of their life. We took these guys on a camp to Melbourne. Now this group included about 7 or 8 kids from the Bagot community. So we made the decision that they needed to have a broader world view. So we took them to Melbourne, and it was fantastic. For some of them, for me, being able to watch what happens to a child when they get 3 square meals a day and 8 hours sleep. 8 hours sleep most night, it was a school camp. For me, as a sport head, to watch my highly excited AFL-obsessed Indigenous lads go to the MCG trying to steal blades of grass and put it in their pocket to bring back to Darwin. That was cool. And watching my Sri Lankan cricket-obsessed young man almost impale himself on a footpath bollard walking out of the MCG because he couldn't take his eyes off the statue of Dennis Lilly. Well, that was mostly just funny. But it was memorable. And what I think we did by working on that anecdote space was I think we were able to create some new anecdotes for those kids, and I think we were able to add to what is their life story. And that made it a memorable space to work in. My next domain that I like to think about is intuition. And I reckon in the old days this might have been about knowledge, but these days it's not. The role of the leader in a school is not to make sure that you're the person with the most knowledge about education. The subject's just too broad for us to be able to focus on that these days. Intuition is about being able to follow your gut and to use the knowledge and the information that you have available to challenge convention and tradition. And to say, is it good enough to keep doing this just because we always have? And one of the things that we confronted at Rosebery Primary School in setting up the new school was the idea of homework. Because 1, we've always done homework in schools. And 2, what are the reasons we've always done homework? It's usually because we think it improves student learning, because it develops work ethic, and because we've always done it. And so we started to look for, is there any proof that that's true? And we found it ain't. So then we've got a problem because we want to do something that people expect us to do the opposite of. So again, that brought us back to the how. How are we going to deliver this message in a way that resonates with our community? And you know what? It's not that hard. When we start to communicate with people that the real impact of homework on primary school kids is it stresses them, it distracts the teacher, and it infuriates parents who need to sit up till 11 o'clock at night making working models of volcanoes. The next area that I like to look at, that seems to not want to come up as well, but anyway, is evidence. And evidence hit me like a bolt out of the blue when I worked with these guys at Bakewell Primary School. These guys managed to reduce the amount of aggressive behaviours that they were showing in the playground from 5.7 down to 2.1 through one intervention of a program called Rock and Water, which is about teaching boys how to be able to handle the emotions they experience under pressure and do something strong, smart and respectful. Fantastic. I was so excited, and then I realised, oh my God, I'm a data nerd. I was the cool teacher that did things on a whim and I was completely unaccountable. And I had to forgive myself that and say, you know what, it's okay. Data doesn't have to be all corny and uncool and politically correct mumbo jumbo. I can be excited by it. And as a principal now, I get really excited, and this is something that is not cool to say, I get really excited by NAPLAN data. And I get excited by watching teachers get their hands dirty with NAPLAN data, trying to work out what the focus should be for the next 5 weeks of their program. I reckon that's cool. A 4-page spread in the NT News categorising NAPLAN data without context, not so cool, but that's a whole other TED talk. So what I ended up with was my U-Butte model for how to open a brand new school. And the thing I really like about my model is it creates all these play spaces because they're all positive spaces to be. There's no domain of apathy or aggression or anything like that. So they're all positive play spaces for me to work in. But what it does allow me to do is to be reflective about where I am at any particular time. And I reckon this can be overlaid against other industries as well. I reckon this allows me to say, okay, I've found some really interesting evidence. Does it work well when I think about the anecdote of the people that I work with? And then does my gut tell me that this is a great idea for a 2011 school? And if I get that right, I find myself in that little perfect storm area in the middle, where our decisions are meaningful, impactful, and they make a difference in student learning. But you know what? Like all models, mine is flawed. My model will not work if we plant it in a relational wasteland. Like I said to you at the start, I think that our great imperative as educators these days is to make sure that our kids experience quality relationships. And I think my model will fail if I plant it in an area that doesn't pay attention to that. And you know what? We're starting to do it in Australia. We have a little habit. You may have noticed that there's this country a long way away called the United States. And we had this habit of trending after them a little bit. And for about 30 odd years or so, they've been adding to the tornado. They see a problem, they spend some money on a program, and they chuck it in the tornado. And schools decide whether or not they're going to reach a hand out the window and drag it in. And it's not working. We've forgotten the how, and slowly, school by school, system by system, the education system in America is breaking down. And I think we're at a really critical fork in the road about doing something about that.
Today, there's a crisis in America. It goes beyond healthcare, the economy, and national security. Look a little closer, even right down the street. The crisis that's at the heart of our country is in our schools. Out of 28 reporting developed countries, American students rank 20th in graduation rates. While we were once pioneers in public education, now we've fallen behind. The key to solving all of these problems rests on solving one thing first: education. And the stakes are higher than we think. Here is Miss Robinson. She has 32 students in her class. These kids are the future of our country. But in order to reach their full potential, they need a great education. In America right now, a kid drops out of high school every 26 seconds. That's 3 by the end of this video, and 1.2 million a year. These dropouts are 8 times more likely to go to prison, 50% less likely to vote, more likely to need social welfare assistance, not eligible for 90% of new jobs, are being paid 40 cents to the dollar earned by a college graduate, and continuing the cycle of poverty. This is a frightening picture, but it doesn't have to be. When we change the odds, here's what it looks like. How do we ensure that teachers like Miss Robinson help her students succeed? A solution is possible, and it doesn't just rest on her shoulders. Now that you know what's at stake, what will you do?
What happens when we turn the tables is what the narrator asked us then. What happens in an Australian school when we decide that we're not going to go down that path, that we're going to have relational practices in our schools? And what happens is that we start to have situations where we get people like Hayley Ross. I taught Hayley Ross in 2001, 2002 in her year 5 and 6 year in Victoria. And she was a lovely kid from a lovely family who experienced a great difficulty in that mum and dad broke up. Many families go through that these days, and many teachers help their kids through it. After about a year or so of mum raising the 2 girls on her own, mum came into a parent-teacher interview with me and burst into tears. Because she was proud of what I was telling her about her lovely daughter, and also because she was struggling. It was really hard work for her, and that relationship breakdown came out of the blue for her. And after that period of time, her family started to realise the strain on Bronwyn as well. And so I believe it was Bronwyn's mother who said that she needed a break. And she took Hayley and her younger sister for a few days and sent Bronwyn away on a holiday, which was a lovely thing to do. Bronwyn was in the Sari Club in Bali the night the terrorists bombed it. It was about 2 weeks that we didn't see Hayley, but we heard things from Hayley. We heard how she was going. We later found out that Hayley was just dying to get back to school. We'd focused on relationships in our classroom, and they, at that point, became the most critical relationships in Hayley's life. Hayley came back to school, and I remember vividly her friend Jessica coming and getting me on the day that Hayley came back and saying, "Hayley's back at school, she wants to see you." And I told the girls to let themselves into the classroom in my office. And when I came into the office that morning, Hayley was there, and she looked up at me and she said, "Voidy, my mum's dead." And I said, "I know," and I gave her a hug. And then we put in place some more mechanisms for the next few weeks about how we would help Hayley through, just as we'd done for the kids for the last couple of weeks previous. You see, Bronwyn was the sort of mum who organised sleepovers on the weekend for 12 kids in the class. They'd been grieving as well. But despite that, we put some stuff in place to make sure that Hayley was looked after, and it counted. And I think this is the evidence of it on the screen in front of you here. There's a picture up there of Hayley with her partner Kyle, himself a 10-year-old member of that class all those years ago. There's a picture of the teddy bear that we took as a class and all of a sign so that Hayley had something to cuddle at night if she was feeling a bit lonely. There's a picture there of the framed photo that we put together with messages for Hayley so that she knew we cared about her. And Hayley wrote me a letter about a year ago telling me how important it was to her at that time to have the relationships and the support that she needed to get through that period. And she told me that she's now studying to be a midwife because she's got a passion for bringing new life into the world. That's my barbecue story. That's the story I tell. And I reckon people like Hayley Ross are going to change the world. Now that I've shared that with you, it's your mission as well. You need to make a decision. When you go to your next barbecue, will you remember Hayley? And will you speak up? Thank you.